My daughter-in-law snapped at me saying, "You won't fit in with our guests. We don't want your cheap dresses ruining the photos." I stayed calm and said nothing. But on her wedding day, when the doors opened and she realized the entire venue belonged to me, her smile vanished. Before I tell you what really happened, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. My name is Margaret Lawson. I am 70 years old, a widow, and the mother of one son, Daniel. I raised him alone after my husband passed away, working long hours and saving carefully to give him the future he deserved. Through hard work and patience, I built a comfortable life and even invested in a few properties, one of them being a beautiful wedding venue in our town. Daniel grew into a successful man, and when he brought home Sophia, I welcomed her with open arms. At first, I hoped she would become the daughter I never had, but it didn't take long to see her true colors. Sophia was elegant and charming in public, but behind closed doors, she was cold and judgmental. She cared deeply about appearances, about how things looked to her friends, and about status. I was simple in my ways. I didn't wear designer clothes or jewelry. I preferred comfort over fashion, and I lived modestly, even though I could afford more. To Sophia, that was unacceptable. She saw my humility not as grace, but as something shameful. As the wedding planning went on, she became bolder in her remarks. She often left me out of discussions, making it clear that I wasn't part of her vision for the perfect day. But nothing prepared me for the moment when, during a family dinner, she looked directly at me and said, "You won't fit in with our guests. We don't want your cheap dresses ruining the photos." The words hit me hard, but I stayed silent. Daniel sat there, uncomfortable, but he didn't defend me. My heart ached, but I only smiled faintly and nodded. If Sophia thought her insult would break me, she was wrong. What she didn't know was that the very venue she was so proud to show off to her friends already belonged to me. After Sophia's cutting remark at dinner, I thought perhaps she had spoken out of stress, that the pressure of planning such a large wedding had made her sharp. But in the days that followed, it became clear that her words had not been a slip of the tongue. They were how she truly saw me. Sophia became bolder, more dismissive. When she spoke about her wedding, she never included me in her plans. She told her friends that the event would be elegant, the kind of wedding where every photo looks like it belongs in a magazine. Once, while flipping through a bridal catalog at my house, she wrinkled her nose at the modest dress I wore and muttered, "Yes, we'll make sure nobody looks out of place." Her tone was sweet, but her eyes carried the same disdain I had seen at dinner. Daniel, caught in the middle, remained silent most of the time. He loved his fiancée and wanted peace, but his silence hurt me more than Sophia's insults. A son should defend his mother, and yet he looked away whenever Sophia cut me down. One evening, when we were alone, I asked gently, "Daniel, do you really think I would ruin your wedding just by being there?" He avoided my eyes, his jaw tightening. "Mom, it's just easier if you let Sophia handle things her way. She's under a lot of pressure." His words sliced deeper than he realized. I had raised him to value family, to stand by those who stood by him. And now, at the most important moment of his life, he chose silence. Whispers began spreading among our relatives. At a family gathering, my sister-in-law leaned close and asked quietly, "Margaret, is it true Sophia doesn't want you in the wedding photos?" I forced a smile and answered, "It's her day. I only want her to be happy." But inside, humiliation burned. I had become the subject of pity, the mother being pushed aside while her son's bride flaunted her cruelty. The conflict only grew sharper as the wedding approached. Sophia's obsession with appearances reached new heights. She boasted about the venue to everyone who would listen, describing the chandeliers, the marble floors, the gardens outside. "It's the most exclusive venue in town," she bragged. "Our guests will never forget it." She had no idea that the very place she glorified had been mine for years. I kept my silence. I didn't correct her when she claimed she had booked the best venue in the city. I didn't reveal that the contract she signed was processed by my manager, who had worked under me for decades. I let her talk, let her laugh, let her look down on me. because I knew the truth would reveal itself soon enough. But even as I held my composure, the pain of rejection weighed heavily. Every insult replayed in my mind at night when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I thought about my late husband, about how hard we had worked to build security for our family, about how proud he would have been to see Daniel marry. And yet, I also thought about how disappointed he would have been to see the way our son's bride treated me, and how our son allowed it. The turning point of the conflict came during a dress fitting. I had gone with Daniel, hoping to offer a small piece of support. Sophia arrived late, sweeping into the room in her designer clothes, her nose high in the air. When she saw me sitting quietly in the corner, she frowned. "Oh, you're here. I suppose it's fine, but please, don't wear anything too bold on the wedding day. Our guests are very refined, and I don't want distractions." Her words made Daniel flush with embarrassment, but again, he said nothing. I smiled politely, even as my heart pounded in my chest. "Don't worry, Sophia," I said softly. "I'll make sure you have the perfect day." She smirked, thinking she had won. What she didn't realize was that I meant every word. I would make sure she had her perfect day, but not in the way she expected. The conflict was no longer about my place in her wedding. It was about respect, about dignity, about showing her that humility is not weakness. By now, relatives who once pitied me began to murmur their disapproval of Sophia. "She doesn't know who she's dealing with," Anna, my niece, said one evening. "Aunt Margaret, you've carried yourself with more grace than anyone I know. Let her keep talking. Her arrogance will undo her." And deep inside, I began to believe it. The humiliation I had felt slowly turned into resolve. I would not shout, I would not argue, and I would not stoop to her level. Instead, I would let the truth speak when the moment came, and when it did, it would be louder than any insult Sophia had ever thrown my way. The conflict was still burning, but I had already chosen my path. The night after Sophia's cutting remark at the dress fitting, I sat alone in my living room with the lights dimmed low. My hands rested in my lap, and I stared at the framed photograph of my late husband on the mantel. His calm smile looked back at me, and I remembered his words from years ago. "Margaret, dignity isn't in the noise. It's in the silence that speaks for itself." I realized then that Sophia's insults were not mine to carry. They reflected her pride, not my worth. And though her words had hurt, I had something far stronger than anger in my possession: the truth. She had no idea that the grand venue she flaunted to her friends, the one she bragged about as though it were her crowning achievement, was a property I had purchased quietly more than 20 years ago. The decision formed in my heart that evening. I would not shout, I would not argue, and I would not humiliate her with confrontation. Instead, I would let her own pride deliver the lesson. And when the wedding day arrived, she would learn it not from my words, but from the walls around her. The next morning, I made a call to Mr. Harris, the longtime manager of the estate. He had worked with me for years, ensuring the property was cared for, and rented only to events that met our standards. His voice warmed with recognition when he answered. "Mrs. Lawson, what a surprise to hear from you. It's been some time. How are you?" "I'm well, thank you," I replied, though my voice carried the weight of unspoken hurt. "Mr. Harris, I understand the venue is booked this month for a wedding. My son and his fiancée." Yes, he said cheerfully. The young couple was very enthusiastic, the bride especially. She wanted everything perfect, down to the smallest detail. We've been working closely with her to make sure it's exactly as she envisioned. I smiled faintly, picturing Sophia's haughty expressions. "I'm sure you've done well, as always. But there's one thing I ask of you. Don't mention to her, or anyone, that I own the property. Let it remain a surprise until the wedding day. Can you do that?" There was a pause before he answered, his tone filled with curiosity. "Of course, Mrs. Lawson. But may I ask, why?" "Because," I said softly, "sometimes silence is the best way to teach a lesson." He didn't press further. "Consider it done. Everything will run smoothly. She'll never know until the moment comes." When I hung up the phone, a calmness washed over me. I had taken my step, not with anger but with quiet resolve. Over the next few weeks, as the wedding preparations accelerated, Sophia continued her usual behavior. She boasted about the venue, telling relatives and friends, "It's the most exclusive property in town, only the best for our guests." She praised the chandeliers, the manicured gardens, the marble floors, as if she had handpicked them herself. Every time she spoke, I bit my tongue and smiled politely, knowing the truth. Even Daniel, though more reserved than his fiancée, never questioned the booking. He seemed caught up in her vision, repeating her words when guests asked about the plans. "Yes, it's going to be something special," he would say. "Sophia worked hard on this." And I would nod, never correcting him. Only Anna, my niece, knew the truth. One evening, as we sat together sipping tea, she shook her head with a smile. "Aunt Margaret, you're playing a long game. When she finds out, it's going to shake her." I chuckled softly. "I don't want to humiliate her, Anna. I only want her to understand that money and appearances are not everything. Respect matters more than chandeliers and gowns." Anna reached over and squeezed my hand. "You've already won, Aunt Margaret. The rest is just the unveiling." As the days passed, I prepared myself for the wedding, not with gowns or jewels, but with inner strength. I chose a simple yet elegant dress from my wardrobe, one that reflected who I was, modest, but dignified. I had no intention of competing with her or proving her wrong through clothing. I wanted my presence, and the truth of the venue, to speak for itself. Each night, I sat in quiet reflection, imagining how it would unfold. I pictured Sophia walking through those grand doors, smiling proudly, only for her expression to falter when she realized who truly stood behind her perfect backdrop. I imagined the whispers among guests, the shift in Daniel's face when the truth settled in. Yet, I also prayed that the revelation would not only humble her, but plant a seed of understanding. Perhaps, in time, she would look back and realize that respect should never be measured by clothes or wealth, but by gratitude for the people who stand quietly behind your success. By the time the wedding day arrived, I was ready not to fight, but to let the truth shine quietly, ready not to shout, but to let the walls of the venue whisper the lesson, ready to stand with grace, knowing the strength of silence was about to speak louder than Sophia's harshest words. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, with the kind of sky brides dream of. I dressed quietly, choosing a soft navy dress with a pearl brooch my husband had given me years ago. It wasn't new, nor was it expensive, but it was full of meaning. I looked at myself in the mirror, smoothing the wrinkles from my dress. For a moment, I thought of Sophia's harsh words. "We don't want your cheap dresses ruining the photos." I exhaled slowly and whispered to myself, "Today, the truth will speak." When I arrived at the venue, the gardens were alive with the sound of music and the chatter of arriving guests. The place looked magnificent. White roses lined the pathways, crystal chandeliers sparkled in the grand hall, and the staff moved with perfect coordination. Sophia had insisted on perfection, and she had gotten it, but not through her own power. I entered quietly, unnoticed by most, and took a seat near the back. Guests swirled around in elegant gowns and pressed suits, complimenting the beauty of the venue. "It's breathtaking," one woman said. "Sophia really outdid herself." I folded my hands in my lap and smiled faintly, knowing that soon the truth would unravel. Sophia swept into the room not long after, her gown glittering under the light. She carried herself like royalty, chin high, every move practiced for the audience. Daniel stood by her side, handsome in his tuxedo but stiff, as if carrying invisible weight. Before the ceremony began, Mr. Harris, the manager, approached me with a respectful bow of his head. "Mrs. Lawson, everything is in order. Shall we begin?" His voice was kind, but carried enough volume to catch the attention of the guests nearby. Heads turned, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Sophia, noticing the exchange, frowned and stepped closer. "Why are you speaking to her like that?" she demanded, her tone sharp. Mr. Harris looked at her, puzzled. "Because Mrs. Lawson is the owner of this venue. Nothing here happens without her approval." The words landed like a thunderclap. For a heartbeat, the entire room fell silent. Whispers began to ripple through the guests. "Owner? Did he say she owns the place? Margaret Lawson? Really? I sat calmly, my hands folded neatly, as every pair of eyes turned toward me. Sophia's face drained of color, her confidence melting away in seconds. She stammered, What do you mean she owns it? That's impossible. We booked this place ourselves. Mr. Harris, still calm, replied, Yes, you booked it through my office, but the property belongs to Mrs. Lawson. She has owned it for over 20 years. Gasps filled the hall. Guests exchanged wide-eyed looks. A few even leaned toward one another, murmuring, So, all this belongs to her? Daniel's face flushed crimson. He looked at me, his eyes filled with disbelief and shame. His lips parted as though to speak, but no words came. He had known his mother as modest, even ordinary, but he had never imagined she quietly owned the very place his bride had been boasting about for months. Sophia stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing, struggling for words. Her hand clutched the fabric of her gown, and her voice, once full of authority, cracked. Why didn't you say anything? I rose slowly from my seat, smoothing my dress with calm dignity. My voice was gentle but clear, carrying across the hall. Because respect is not earned by shouting who you are. It is shown by how you treat others. I wanted you to have your beautiful day, Sophia, and you have it, here, in this place I made possible. The whispers grew louder, some guests nodding in admiration, others casting disapproving looks at Sophia. One elderly woman near the front whispered loudly enough to be heard. She insulted Margaret, and yet Margaret gave her this wedding. Imagine that kind of grace. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, not from joy, but humiliation. Her perfect image had cracked. She had tried to push me aside, but now she stood exposed in front of everyone, her arrogance laid bare. Daniel stepped forward, his voice low but strained. Mom, I didn't know. His hands trembled slightly. I should have defended you. I'm sorry. I met his gaze, my expression soft but steady. It isn't about apologies, Daniel. It's about respect. And respect is the one thing I have been asking for all along. The ceremony continued, but the air had changed. Guests no longer looked at Sophia with admiration. Their glances carried judgment, while many looked at me with newfound respect. Sophia's proud posture wilted, her smile forced, her eyes darting nervously whenever the whispers rose. As I sat back down, I felt no triumph, no gloating sense of victory. What I felt was peace. I had not needed to lift my voice, to demand my place, or to wear expensive dresses to prove my worth. The truth had spoken for me, and that truth was louder than any insult Sophia had ever thrown my way. That day, in the very hall she thought she had conquered, she learned a lesson that money could not buy. Dignity, once dismissed, has a way of shining through when you least expect it. The wedding ended, but the silence that followed was heavier than the music that had filled the hall hours earlier. Guests had enjoyed the food, admired the decor, and posed for countless pictures. But beneath all the smiles, there lingered a quiet tension. Everyone had witnessed the reveal. Everyone knew the truth, that the very woman Sophia had mocked for being cheap had been the silent force behind the entire venue. That night, I returned home alone. I slipped off my shoes, hung my modest navy dress back in the closet, and sat down in the same chair where I had once questioned whether staying silent was the right choice. My heart was steady now. I had not sought revenge, yet the lesson had unfolded exactly as it was meant to. The next morning, I received a call from Anna, my niece. Her voice was full of energy. Aunt Margaret, I've never seen anything like it. You didn't say a word, and yet the entire room shifted. People couldn't stop talking about you on their way out. I chuckled softly. I didn't want to embarrass her, Anna, but I suppose the truth embarrassed her more than I ever could have. Anna replied firmly. You didn't embarrass her. You exposed her pride. Everyone saw how you carried yourself with dignity. That's something money can't buy. Her words warmed me. For the first time in weeks, I felt the heavy burden of humiliation lifting from my shoulders. I had been underestimated, but I had not been defeated. Later that week, Daniel came to my house. He looked tired. His shoulders slumped as though the weight of the wedding still pressed on him. When I opened the door, he didn't speak at first. Instead, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me. It was the first embrace I had felt from him in a long time. "Mom?" he whispered. "I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you." I let her words go too far. I held him tightly, my eyes closing as tears welled. "Daniel, you are my son. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to remember where you came from. Respect is not a burden. It's love in its simplest form." He pulled back and nodded, his eyes glistening. "I see that now. When Mr. Harris said your name, I wanted to sink into the floor. I realized in that moment how blind I had been. You gave me everything, and I let someone treat you as though you were nothing." I smiled faintly. "You're not the only one who learned a lesson that day." Sophia didn't come with him. In fact, she avoided me entirely. Word reached me through relatives that she had been humiliated, that she struggled to face the whispers of her own friends, who had admired the venue so loudly just days before. Her pride had fractured, but whether it would soften her heart was a question I couldn't answer. For me, it didn't matter. I hadn't acted to punish her. I had acted to protect my own dignity, to show her and Daniel that silence does not equal weakness. Sometimes the strongest voice is the one that doesn't need to shout. In the weeks that followed, the phone calls came slowly. Cousins, neighbors, even acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years reached out. They all said the same thing. "We admire your grace. We hope our children treat us with the respect you showed you deserve." I listened. I thanked them. But I never spoke poorly of Sophia. I didn't need to. Her actions had spoken for her. One evening, I sat by my late husband's photograph once again. I lit a candle beside it, the flame flickering gently in the quiet room. "She tried to silence me," I whispered, "but instead she silenced herself. And you were right, Thomas. Silence can be louder than any words." Peace filled me that night. Not joy, not triumph, but peace. I knew the road with Daniel and Sophia would be complicated, but I had regained something more important than their approval. I had reclaimed my dignity. The lesson was clear. No matter how others try to diminish you, your worth does not shrink. Respect is not earned by money, clothes, or titles. It is earned by the life you've lived and the sacrifices you've made. And even when others fail to see it, the truth always finds a way to shine. So I chose to live with my head held high, not bitter, not angry, but firm in who I was. Because at the end of the day, appearances fade, but dignity remains. If you believe every parent deserves respect, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are watching from.